in terms of introductions and speakers, so my name is Rob Catalano, Chief Engagement Officer of a company called WorkTango. That picture is actually before I went into self-isolation. This is what the product is right now. Clearly a lot grayer and hairier than I was before. But I've been spending the last 17, 18 years helping companies, whether it's from an employee engagement perspective on a consulting side or building HR technology companies. And it's just something that I have true passion with, and been through a couple of these crises in the past. I've been in the workplace a long time. I want to share some of the wisdom of crowds and knowledge that I've had based on this topic. But I'm going to likely do less of the speaking today, and we wanted to introduce our guest today, John, aka Big Tall John. I see that more than your real name, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce that second one. And John is the Chief Talent Officer at Pivot and Edge, and John used to be the head of talent acquisition at Halogen, was head of global talent acquisition at Saba Software. Has a lot of passion in this space as well. But I want to leave it to you, John, to tell anything more interesting about your background that might be relevant to today.
Anything interesting about my background?
Or is that it? That's pretty much the two things you've done. And
no, I think I have never lost a nail hammering contest, which is, that's not on my resume. Not that I have one. And I used to have really awesome hair. Like I used to have a mane. I could do this, that kind of stuff, I guess. But no, I appreciate the intro there. I guess interesting stuff. I like to think of myself as a non-HR person in the sense that I totally fell into recruiting accidentally. I needed a job after university. I studied biomedical toxicology, and that's a whole nother story for another day. And my resume was just hammering nails, working construction, and then having a specialized degree I couldn't do anything with. So I feel like HR is a really interesting world that doesn't necessarily require specific experience. It requires more life experience in general. And you'll probably hear this just in what I'm saying and that kind of stuff. But I think we're both kind of in similar worlds because of our mindsets and how we're not necessarily following the rules every day.
Fair enough. But again, getting a little more serious, what I want to talk about and get people's thoughts on is I want to kind of get a sense of what people are thinking in terms of the current crisis with COVID, and a quick poll on: are you actively hiring? Are you on a hiring freeze? Or are you downsizing talent? Or planning to do it in very short order? So I'm just trying to pull up the second poll here and get that going to get a sense of who's on the call and what's the headspace of a lot of the people that we have on right now. So so it should be in everyone's list right now. A lot of people are responding. So we got about 40%. So I'm just going to share these right now so we can get into the results. But basically, I'm just sharing it right now with everyone. So it looks like there was around a third of people that are actually still actively hiring, which is quite surprising. 45% though are on a hiring freeze, but very similar percentage actively hired to or recently or plan on downsizing talent. So I think it's safe to say that this topic in terms of managing reputation throughout this crisis, especially when things are changing in the organization, is definitely a topic that's worth conversation and discussion. So that being said, I'm going to kind of hand it over to John to get us going. Basically, the structure of what this is going to look like is John's going to give us his overview of some major kind of thoughts and approaches that he's structured in a really interesting way. And then we are going to get into more of a conversation as well. So it'd be great to see, again, use the Q&A when questions that come up based on what's John talking about. I have full permission to interrupt John when I want to ask one of your questions or dive in with one myself or any thoughts. So, without further ado, John, let's get into the content.
So appreciate that, Rob, and all of the curveballs are welcome. That's great. So Rob, as you know, from getting to know me, I'm a very structured, very kind of regimented, here's my slides and my bullet points. And I've got another monitor up here, and I'm just going to, spend the next 20 minutes reading, if that's cool, and just kind of saying words and stuff. But I kind of feel like it's worth acknowledging that no one knows what's going to happen and when it's going to happen and when it's going to get better and all of that kind of stuff. So we're all kind of in this completely disrupted, upside down world right now. when you're going from a scenario where you're heading in one direction, one trajectory, one velocity, and then all of a sudden everything changes, it's terrifying. It really is. But it's also an opportunity to really take stake of, is what we're doing really the smart thing that we should be doing right now for the long-term benefit of the people and the organizations and the strategies that we're driving? And that's really first uncovered, at least from my own perspective, the importance of slowing down to speed up. So what I mean by this, we're kind of in a forced situation where everything that we had planned in February, everything that we had planned in March, all of the activities we've done to engage our employees and to promote our organizations and, draw more people in that we're looking for, now is not the time to really be selling this stuff. Now is the time to really be focused inward on, is what we're really doing the most important and impactful thing that we can be doing? And I'd argue that now is not the time to reinvent the wheel within our organizations. Like, certainly there's business impact, there's people impact, but now's not the time to be launching a new performance management strategy. Like, your employees don't want to hear that. Your employees want to know, what is going to be the long-term or the short-term impact for everything that's going on in the business now. And the communication that we really have with our employees now, and certainly, we're in uncertain times and everyone's looking for certainty, but we've all seen either ourselves or a family member or a friend or a colleague be impacted by this in a negative way. So it's one of these things where focusing on is my job at risk as a question is probably not the right question. The right question is, what can I be doing to help everyone around me? And maybe that means, like we were chatting before, Rob, about the shift of, right now, anyone using marketing automation to aggressively sell product that is a nice to have that no one really needs, now's not the time. But shifting your resources internally that are focused on one thing that could be focused on something else is massively important to the long-term nature of all of our businesses. But being able to communicate that uncertainty is really tough. And that's where being open and as transparent as possible and actively communicating and being responsive and acknowledging we don't know what we don't know, but we're going to do everything that we can to avoid ABC outcome, and here's why. That kind of thing is so much more important. So I really feel right now, one thing that we could all do that can really impact how our employees are feeling, and ultimately what that has as an impact on our overall reputations, it's all about treating people like humans. It's all about treating people well and acknowledging the unknown and what we don't know. But the idea of delivering certainty in uncertain times, I'm getting sick of, not sick, I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter. I don't know if you feel the same way, but Twitter to me is kind of like the WWE wrestling world, where you can watch it for 30 seconds and nothing has changed in like 3 years. And it either is enjoyable or it's horrible at the same time. And there's so much negativity on Twitter right now. It's just nuts. And then you look at the news outlets too. I don't want to pick on any network specifically, but I've limited myself now to check the news in the morning and at night, not during the day. I don't need to see the rising death toll or infection count or anything like that. But when you think about how we digest information as a society, that's readily impacted by what we feel as human beings. And if you're an organization that is cash rich and you've got tons of long-term contracts, tons of profitability and cash in the bank, and then you lay off 30% of your staff, like, what do those employees feel? Like, why is that happening? So it's one of these things where I really feel it's important now for organizations to really focus on what they know to be true. And as they're communicating their plan, their strategy, their context to their employees, to really have a long-term view of a short-term problem. And know that if you're an employer that is, I think it was Trudeau was on talking about, the 75% workforce, I'm not sure what the right word is, subsidy, I guess, only applies to this, but we're only doing that because we don't want scammers to get involved. Like, I think right now it's never been more important for the internal communications to really be rich, really be honest, really focus on, we don't know what we don't know, but here's our plan. Because those communications of today are going to leave a lasting impression on the people that are impacted by downsizing and restructuring and all that kind of stuff. But B, they're also going to impact everybody else that you held on to, because they're going to have that survivor guilt and know that I worked for a company that said this but did that. So I think for delivering certainty in uncertain times, it's really about focusing on what we know to be true and tossing everything else in the bin and just trying to see the silver lining in everything else that we do. We kind of touched on this, Rob. If you want to click the thing again, how many of you showed up today to get a sales pitch? And I'm going to assume none of you. And that's okay. You're human beings. That's not the intent here. But now really is the time to build. Adversity brings opportunity with it. We're all in situations where our resources are likely limited to what they were 2 weeks ago or a month ago, or will even in a month from now. Our resources are going to look different. But this is a scenario where I kind of feel that adversity creates the need for creativity, which creates the need for confidence, which creates the need for outcomes. And when you're looking at your systems and your programs and your strategies from a people perspective now, I don't think anyone on this call would be able to put their hand up and say, our HR strategy is humming 100%. There's nothing we can improve. We're living the dream as it relates to people. Everyone has opportunity to really dig into what are the projects that have been back burner for us because we just didn't have the time, that we can now prioritize. And that's where I think there's a really interesting tie with WorkTango, Rob, is the idea of asking for feedback from your employees right after you won an Employer of the Year award. There's no value in that. But the importance for having rich one-on-ones with your employees now, the importance of having stay interviews with your employees right now, the importance of asking your employees. I acknowledge that you went from a work in the office scenario to now a work remote or a work from home scenario. Like, how has it been going? What could we be doing better? Do you need another monitor? Like, how's the digital phone app, the voice over IP, whatever? Now is really the time to look at what have we been putting on the back burner that we really should prioritize now? Because even though all of our resources are less than they were, we all have more time now than we did 2 weeks ago. And all of these decisions that we're making right now are going to have a lasting impact. And we don't know how long that lasting impact is going to be, if it's going to be a month, if it's going to be 6 months. But do you want to be the HR leader or the organization that had the opportunity to really go back to basics and establish or fix or modify really impactful stuff that your business and your employees really need, but then you didn't? I see a question coming in. I'm just going to jump in here, Rob, and I'd love your impact as well, or not your impact, your input. How do you build if many organizations are downsizing and likely trying to do more with less? That's a great question. And I think, I'm not going to say the name of the person, but I think that the answer to that really depends on where are your weaknesses from a strategy standpoint right now that all of a sudden you have resources for. Like, realistically, not every project needs 10 people. Not every project needs new software. It doesn't always need budget. It may just need eyes. So when I say build, I'm not trying to say, build from scratch. It could be improve an existing framework that's just not fully baked just yet. But Rob, what do you think about the idea of using this as an opportunity to build as opposed to sell?
Yeah, so maybe it's good kind of point to say, kind of the front end, just getting some thoughts and topics for conversation. So now I see some questions coming in, so definitely get some of your questions coming in as well, and we'll address them and have more of a discussion right now on these kind of concepts and the whole idea around managing, a reputation coming out of this. But in terms of your question, or the one that came in, how do you build if organizations are downsizing? It's interesting, right? There's a comment that came up before from Joanne that said, Elizabeth Howell, who's a neuropsychologist in New Zealand, said there's a 3C model at the current time applicable to employee support: certainty, control, and connection. And again, you don't need fantastic technology. You don't need any of these things or new programs. You might have to ask some people to do more with less, but those, to your point, it's the people, initiatives, and the focus and the communication that I think is important. So it may not be building from a person, headcount, and new process perspective, but what I've seen is if you focus on kind of that EQ and kind of the emotional kind of intelligence part of it versus everything to do in terms of what's going to build your business, sales, etc. Again, people are they're focused on other things right now. If you rally all the talent and leadership and focus to the EQ side versus IQ, then I think that's what I see in terms of building, because this topic is really about how do you have a reputation of doing the right thing during this crisis. You're going to have to ask more for your employees you currently have later, the ones you did keep. So you need to focus internally before you look externally. So I think it's building, depending on which way you direct it. If it's building internal, that's, important time to spend and important resources versus we need to build new technology, new programs, new things to sell, etc. So when I see build, I first look at employee first, right? Customer sat and etc. is later. But the other point on that is that your customers are kind of a second on that list, right? Loving the customers you currently have, being resilient and focusing on helping them. Maybe I see that more in a world where we have customers who are in HR who, this is a challenge for them. I think that's another way you could build the relationships with your customers, whether it's things that they require or need. Because a lot of that stuff comes reciprocal when, when it comes to things coming out of this crisis.
I think just to add to that as well, I think, and okay, I'll say it was Jeff. It was a great question, Jeff. Another thing to look at as well is now's an opportunity to have more kind of cross lateralization of, the HR person getting more involved with the marketing team, or more involved with the dev team, or more involved with the customer support team, and really understanding the context that those employees really live within, and seeing if there's opportunities where something that we've learned in marketing, we can apply in product management, or we can apply in HR, or we can apply somewhere else. So it's to your point, Rob, it's really now, at least from my perspective, to really focus on the people side and not the business side. Because I think, who was it? Was it Richard Branson that said if you focus on the people will do the customer stuff, and then you get the revenue, blah, 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 that sort of mentality?
Yeah, service profit chain.
This could really be an opportunity in time to have more of that injection of broader skill set in environments that they wouldn't have had access to before, or you just didn't prioritize before.
Yeah. So I'm interested in your thoughts, John, because where Jeff's mind went in that question is where my head kind of went, because it seemed like 1 and 3 was really kind of counterintuitive to each other. Like, how do you slow down to speed up, but build? So where my mind went was kind of the internal versus external. Just not sure if there's any, clarity in what you mean from those items.
So I'll try and answer that in an analogy. Italy's been hit really, really hard. We're all familiar with the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Now, that wasn't necessarily an architectural challenge. That was more of a foundational challenge as to the ground being able to support the structure long term. So instead of adding new layers to the top of the tower, it's really time to look at how can we actually solve this thing so this can be stable long term that we can then build on top of. So the slowing down to speed up is really more around the idea of what we were doing 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, likely are not the priorities that we should be focused on right now. The priorities that we should be focused on right now are going to have the most significant impact short-term and long-term to our business, especially as it relates to our reputation as an employer, because we're going to come out of this. Like we are going to overcome. We're all going to be stronger as individuals and as community. And when that time comes, we're going to accelerate then. So by focusing on the priorities that we should be focused on now that we may not necessarily have in our view, those are going to yield the opportunities for us to really build down the road.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense when you think about like slowing down what were current priorities to shift those priorities to build better relationships, et cetera, that we kind of talked about when it comes to internal focus. I'd love to see if there's like a example of one of these three or all of these three that you have from an organization that might be doing something at the moment or something tangible that people can take back. But before you do, one thing that comes to mind for me is that when it comes to you're the point you just made about slowing down the priorities of what your organization was doing and kind of the difference of number 3, I always found that like companies at this time, what they do is they stop all of their people initiatives or their engagement programs or whatever they're doing. And I guess the advice I have to everyone, what I've seen a lot of our customers do is just adapting them. Like, don't change them, but adapt them. Like, take stock of what you're currently doing. They may not be able to happen in person or based on how your world has changed, but how do you adapt them to be online or whatever it is?
Yeah.
But the moment you start taking away the focus on the people, that's where you start building a bit of that reputation where, you know, it's not going to be people first. We're going to deploy dollars to other things or innovation, et cetera, but not internal. So I think that, to me, that sounded like a good kind of discussion around number 1 and 3 that you just had. But my advice is just adapt what you have. Don't kill it. And you could, you know, a lot of people find reasons to not do things. We're in different time zones. We can't do things in person. It's like, record a video and send it out. Like, if CEOs can get on videos and record them and send messages to people to add that second part of uncertainty or certainty, you know, your company can do it as well.
Yeah. One thing that I'm seeing, and I think I heard the question. I just want to make sure, and I'll go off on a ramble. And when I don't answer, just poke me again. One thing that I'm seeing right now is a lot of organizations that already seem to have a really strong approach towards recruitment marketing and not aggressively, but effectively advertising their cultures that was more internally focused. Like, we went to this event today, or we went axe throwing, or whatever, are now transitioning those channels and followings and employees to encourage them to help the community. So using their channels, I think it's CIRA, the Canadian Internet Registration Authority now. I don't think there's a structured campaign going on. I think it's a matter of employees are saying, hey, if you can give to the food bank, here's the link, and then hashtagging it their company hashtag. And then anyone in the company that sees it saying, holy crap, I can do that too. So that kind of stuff I really see as a positive shift that the world needs right now. Because keep in mind that there are probably 100 times more people that don't even know this webinar is happening that need our help more than we needed ourselves. And those are the people that are leveraging the community, the food banks, the homeless, all of the mental health, all of that kind of stuff. And so what I am seeing that I feel is a really positive shift is that there seems to be this shift from come work with us to how can we help you? You know what I mean? So that I've really enjoyed and really seen as a positive. What was your next question, Rob? I went off on a tangent.
I just wanted to see if there's anything tactical, you know, companies doing that we can sink our teeth into, right? Do you know a company who's doing something in these 3 buckets that, you know, we could, you know, kind of inspire us to do something in our organizations?
Yeah. So one thing that I am seeing a lot of our clients, because we're involved with helping organizations scale up and set up their hiring infrastructure and attract and blah, blah, blah. One thing that we've seen is there's a hesitation, or there's this mindset of we don't know when this is going to end. There's another question that's just popped up that I think we should answer as well from Joanne. But the idea of slowing down hiring right now absolutely makes sense. It totally makes sense. But slowing down attraction and conversation absolutely does not. So there's very few people that are going to want to make life-changing decisions right now until there's some sort of clarity in the market, as opposed to, you know, I'll take the offer tomorrow and I'll do a virtual onboarding and so on and so forth. But for organizations that are just stopping to hire right now, when we come out of this, they are going to be screwed. And there's going to be a land rush for talent, and now is the opportunity to build relationships with those individuals, being fully transparent. Let's have a weekly phone call. Let's have a weekly update email, something to not just get through, but go through a really structured selection process where you are not just hiring for hiring's sake, but knowing that you are hiring someone that you want to commit to after this crisis. And having that program communicated regularly throughout the next month, next 2 months, what have you. So we are seeing, one thing that we've been recommending to our clients is it makes sense to not hire right now. It does not make sense to just freeze hiring right now. Now is an opportunity to build those relationships and really make sure when you have, think of it as a dating scenario. When you go on 3 dates with someone versus 20 dates with someone, how well do you know the person after the 3rd versus the 20th? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you have the opportunity now to have those 20 dates before you make that commitment. So take advantage of it. Yeah. If you just say, I'm not going to date anyone right now, this is going to end in X period of time. And then you're going to want to go to the movies with somebody, and you're going to have no pipeline. You're going to have no access. Every other company that just pulled the plug is going to be in the exact same spot. There's going to be an immense amount of pressure, a huge land rush for talent. And the people that have been able to get to know those organizations over a period of time, knowing full well, listen, we are not going to actually make an offer in the next 2 weeks or in the next 3 weeks or next month. We intend to make an offer when this kind of settles down a little bit and we have more stability, et cetera. But over the next period of time, let's have more conversation and make sure that we keep you apprised with everything that we're doing that we can. Like, I'm not suggesting any company secrets go out the door, but really focusing on leveraging this opportunity as a time to really make better hiring decisions slower in a time where time is less relevant than it was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you know, even at our organization, we're interviewing, but we're being really open with people. Once we kind of get a better sense of what's happening, you know, we'll make that call at that time. But I'd rather be later down the funnel than earlier, especially with some additional time to do some things. There's a really good question. Actually, Christian, you kind of summarized one of the earlier points. It's not a good time to revolutionize anything. It's a good time to make existing things better. So I kind of like the way that you frame that. But a question came in from Joanne. Says, what are your thoughts about building a ramp-up period or building an approach to our return to life after COVID? So COVID has been managed and we're in our new future. Employees are returning to life after COVID. As an employer, what can we try to anticipate and so build into our new future? Is it new budget plans with more tools, maybe new skill sets? Any thoughts on that question from Joanne?
Yeah, I am really, really curious to see what ends up happening with the organizations that were hesitant or resistant to things like work from home, to things like workforce flexibility, to things like ensuring managers are prepared and capable of having rich conversation with their employees? Because now is the time where organizations and leaders that are weak kind of in those areas or rigid in those areas are going to be exposed big time. To answer your question, there absolutely should be some sort of plan to get back to normal. We won't know when we can actually execute on that plan, but I think as leaders now, one of the main things that HR leaders specifically should be focused on is coaching. Should be focused on things like empathy, things like being responsive, that kind of thing. I'd love to be able to say step one is this, step two is that, step three is that, but there's so many variables that it'd be difficult to know, you know, when do you execute and when do you apply. But I'm really, really curious to see how industry reacts to our next new normal after this, because, you know, employees, once we get out of this, employees are going to say, well, I was working from home for the last month or 6 weeks or 3 months, whatever it is. Why do I have to work in the office now? And our people leaders need to be prepared for that. So, you know, and keep in mind, our people leaders are in that same boat. So they're probably going from a scenario where they had a normal, maybe they went to the office 4 days a week or 5 days a week, what have you. Now we've had to help them through the idea of being a virtual leader. Now we have to get ready to be able to arm them with the capability of responding to and having a strategy for what does our next normal look like and what does that include. So companies that haven't embraced flexibility or some sort of work from home strategy that are now being forced to do it, absolutely, yes, you need an exit strategy on, are we going to maintain this or not? And if we're not, how are we going to explain that? Because that's basically telling your employees, well, we trusted you when there was a pandemic, but we don't trust you now that we can go outside and shake hands. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that one there for sure. From a technology standpoint, there's all sorts of technology now that we probably were using for the most part, but now we're more relying on. I think the importance of the richness and authenticity of the conversations is impacted by the technology that we leverage. So if that means you now have budget for a paid Zoom account as opposed to a free Zoom account, or I don't know, like an HR management a conversation tool like Fellow, or even the survey tools like you guys, Rob, I think it's important now that we're showing our employees that we care and that we listen, and these are the steps that we're taking to make sure that you can be as productive as you can. And we know that during this whole crisis, you've got your family at home, you've got your kids at home, you've got your dog at home. Everyone is worried, everyone's concerned. We know that you're not necessarily going to be focused 100% as you would have been 2 months ago. But having a plan to transition from this new normal to our next new normal, I think is going to be wildly important, because employees are people. And when you go from A and then you go to Z, and then you ask them to go back to A, that's really tough.
Yeah, just a quick answer to add to Joanne's. One thing I've been recommending to companies, first thing is do a quick retrospective. Like literally like shit hit the fan, so to speak, and we reacted, and just ask your organization and employees first is what went well, what didn't, and what would we do differently next time. So now you at least have an idea of where the things fell that you're gonna need to focus on, what went well that we wanna keep doing. And I find that new world of where we're challenged today gives you a little bit of indication of where to spend time a little later. And that retrospective process, I think, really works. And one of the things I was going to mention before John said it is there is a bit of time now to do some of that empathy training, getting people to understand the impact of this on individuals, because, you know, God knows how long this is going to take. But I've seen some companies really take that approach when it comes to your question around like life after COVID. Like, we don't really know, but if we know what our needs are, now we can start focusing on that a little later from a priority standpoint. Other thing, a quick advice, if you don't have a crisis team set in place today, if you're a small company, it might be everyone. If it's a large company, it might be a core group. There should be a group of people that are at least keeping certain parts of a crisis in mind, right? Are we taking care of communication? Are we taking care of, you know, X, Y, Z, all the things that matter, and keep them accountable to that in terms of them wanting to be a part of the bigger project. But I find that helps as opposed to everyone waiting for someone else to do something.
It's kind of, what is that called? Like a phone tree?
Pardon me?
I was trying to remember, like during like back where I grew up, we had tornadoes occasionally, and there was like a phone tree. Like Rob calls Steve, Steve calls John, John calls whatever.
Yeah, you don't want that happening because no one will move. There's another question here from Laurel. I'm not happy about it, but I've always been the eternal optimist. I've tried to change but can't. I've been upholding our staff, those employed and work getting home, as well as those that we have laid off. But I very much feel the need to uphold my boss, the CEO. I don't want him to sway or stress unnecessarily. Do you have ideas to bolster him without being too pushy because we need him?
So Laurel, I'm going to ask some clarifying questions. So if you're still with us, if you could respond via text, I think would be the easiest way of saying this. I'm curious to understand why you've tried to change from being an optimist, number one. If that's something where, you know, seeing the glass half full has yielded negative impact, or what the context is of why you want to change, or why you've tried to change from that. And the second question, clarifying question, but I feel very much the need to uphold my boss. What do you mean by that? You don't want him to stress unnecessarily. If you could respond to that, that'd be helpful, but maybe until I see that, or maybe in the chat, Laurel, if you're there. There you go. Because people think I'm unrealistic. Your glass is overflowing. Well, if people don't think you're being realistic, that's not necessarily your problem. Like if it's a scenario where you have that infectious energy, I shouldn't have said infectious in this time. Infectious energy is what was intended. You know, there's a lot of value and enthusiasm and positivity. If you could sprinkle in some analytics and some data and some context behind that could help sway people to understand why you're behaving in the way you're behaving, in the sense of, you know, we can get this done in 3 weeks, and here's how we're going to do it, and here's why it's important. That's much more impactful than let's go get this done now, sort of thing. At the CEO level, I think every CEO views HR and HR leadership as kind of the pulse of the organization. And if the CEO is stressed unnecessarily, the employees will see that. So I think without the context, I think the best response to that, or tips I would provide, is have check-ins with the CEO and just the CEO, and just try and dig into that onion and see how are they feeling, and if they're stressed, why are they stressed, and just do your best to provide the listening ear, but also the data and the context around, if this happens, then here's our plan. And if that happens, then here's how we could react to that. But what do they say in the Navy? Like, the captain goes down with a ship. If the captain is jumping off the boat's done. I got news for you. So as HR leaders, it may not be comfortable, but it's our responsibility to provide the support and context that the CEO needs, regardless if that stresses them out.
Yeah, I find with a lot of CEOs, like when you put into context that it's great, that you're doing your job, upholding staff, focusing on them from an HR perspective. But, it's kind of what you mentioned with the example earlier on the service profit chain, right? Yes, there's shareholder value or profitability. Yes, there's customer satisfaction, but those are all outputs, and none of that stuff happens unless the inputs of what employees do every day, et cetera, are building great products or great services. So letting a CEO understand that if we don't focus on the inputs and the positive experience around that, then it's going to be hard for these people to shift in terms of providing value once we do get out of this. So just that focus on the inputs and the people, that's where you'll see yourself come out of it. That's where you'll have a better reputation and be able to hire people back. And sometimes CEOs forget because they're looking at the numbers all day, right? They're worried about what might be happening in the business, but now's the time to work on the business, right? Like in terms of the people that are driving it. So I found that that's helped from a CEO perspective, conversations I've had with them. The other thing as well is actions speak louder than words at a leadership. 100%. So if they're stressed, your company and employees are going to be stressed. If they're going to the office but telling everyone to stay home, right, then people are not going to believe that that's the way things need to be done here. So I always find that whatever they're emitting out into the world is what's going to be absorbed by the employees, and CEOs and leaders, not just CEOs, have to be cognizant of that.
Yep. And what's funny is we can have that conversation, Rob. We can say that and we can intuitively understand that. But I bet what more people are seeing on a day-to-day right now, there's so many dog owners, there's so many cat owners, pet owners, whatever. When you have a dog and you're stressed out, that dog is stressed out. Now, this is a dog. You know what I mean? This dog is not making $1 million decisions. This dog is not choosing to hire or fire or pause or furrow or anything like that. This dog just knows that it gets to go outside for a walk soon and it gets to eat food in an hour. That's what a dog knows. But they can still feel that. And right now we're all getting more time to actually experience that with our pets and with our families and with our life in general. Sorry, I just got distracted with another question. But it's easy to put leadership in like a pedestal and not want to rock the boat. But then when we get home, we know exactly how to behave with our animals and how they react. So I'm not suggesting that we give our CEOs belly rubs, but I am suggesting, again, just consider the context and the way we behave impacts everybody else.
Yeah. And the thing that you saw was actually not really a question, but I think an awesome comment. Like, you can't put remote work genie back in the bottle. Like, in terms of coming out of this, companies that get intentional about developing a strategy will gain buy-in and reap benefits. Those who assume the world will go back to normal will erode trust and hand benefits to competitors. Like, let's be honest, like 9 to 5, that concept of it in a lot of organizations that were actually able to operate outside of 9 to 5 with people working at home, like that world is non-existent anymore. Right. And when employees are going to love the value of working at home, might want to get out a little more than they are right now and have that flexibility. Like, if you don't provide that offering, to Christian's point, like, it's going to be harder to retain or find talent moving out of this. So it's a really good point. I think companies need to understand. That's why I was like, depending on what the company, that retrospective is half about what you're doing now, but it's also a future look at what is our world going to need a year from now, kind of that future vision, and saying, are we even set up for it? Because some companies were able to get by, but these are Band-Aids. Companies need to figure out what is the long-term strategy and resources to get there.
I saw there was a comment, I don't know if it was the QA or if it was the chat, but someone had made a comment about Zoom's usership, and it went from 50 million to 200 million in days.
Yeah. Like,
companies that weren't leveraging video conversation before, I don't know how they don't continue that. No idea.
Yeah. So I guess there's like about kind of 3-4 minutes left. Just want to get a sense of any other questions or comments. So actually interesting, Michael, you never forget the social aspect of the workplace. I don't know if that's a question or a comment, and it's really interesting, right? Like, when I read that, I think about, like, obviously social is important, but we've all been in a situation where we've had to be at home and we've kind of figured it out. Like, we're doing house parties and stuff with our friends, and we're doing video calls that look like this with, parents and grandparents that never do this, but they figured it out. And I find that people are really trying to get that social world where at least a 2D video is still providing some value, we still do that idea I was telling you earlier about not like adapting, not changing your engagement things. Like we're still doing drinks on Friday, but virtually, we're still doing events, etc. But I still think that concept, like, yes, you want to be face to face, but there are ways to do that in a remote world given this crisis. And I think keeping people together, will help you come out of this. And think about it. This session was really about your reputation during COVID. It's how you responded and kept employees together that's going to give your staff confidence that you're going to be able to figure things out at the next crisis. So I think you still have to operate and focus on people in that realm as well.
So there's one just came in as well. Someone manages a part of a remote team and part an office team. I thought I did well at connecting with my remote team before. Now we're all doing daily coffee chats with webcams, and I realized how much I hadn't been connecting with them. It's a really interesting comment. Like when we know I used to manage a team in India, and although I got to go there, the time that I had there versus trying to fight with a time zone and WhatsApp, and then we have the video through WhatsApp, but the phone through Glip, like that was a nightmare. It's really interesting to see how this has really caused us to think about, if I have remote and I have in-house, how do I change? Like, how is my behavior different? And how can we apply this moving forward? Because now's the time to engage. Now's the time to really, and I don't think we have to make an extra effort. I think we're all in the HR profession. I think if you're not empathetic, you're not successful, period. But the idea of focusing on, we've already talked about this, focusing on connecting with others in a way that is engaging for both parties and shows that both parties care. That's going to be the difference between a company that comes out of this winning and a company that comes out of this losing. Because it's sad, but there are going to be organizations that at no fault of their own will face difficult decisions, and some of them won't make it. But for the companies that do make it, some of them are going to lose. Because they won't be prepared, they won't be capable of making that transition to our next new normal. The ones that really pay attention to their people now and how they're interacting with their future employees, whether that be hiring's frozen or we don't know when we can pull the trigger, but we do know that we will at some point, and so let's take some time and get to know each other. There's going to be winners and losers.
So one thing I thought would be, and we didn't plan it like this, but a good way to end it is any last kind of quick piece of advice, how you manage your reputation as an employer, something people can actually start doing today that's not a kind of a broader plan. I have a couple of thoughts that come to mind, but John, you want to start?
Yeah, so we haven't been immune to this with our business as well. And we've had to make some tough choices too. And it's no fault of the people, it's the reality of the business. I think maintaining contact with anyone that was impacted in a negative sense is vital. Whether that be helping introduce them to other organizations or giving them a recommendation on LinkedIn, or just keeping up with the text-based conversation or the FaceTime or the whatever. How you doing? Like, how's life? What are you eating? Trying to maintain some sort of normalcy with anyone that has been negatively impacted by this, I think is it may not provide the outcome that they're seeking, but at least it shows you care. So if you've had to lay off 500 people, obviously that's a bigger task, but there's power in numbers of coaching up your leaders to coach up your managers, to coach up your leads, to all exude that behavior at the same time. So I think anyone that's been impacted by this, it wasn't their fault. And so don't treat them like it was.
Yeah. It's funny, I have on my house desk here a little note that the moment this all went down and we knew we were going to have to shift things, in the business, there were a couple of things I wrote. One was double down on communication, like open, transparent, honest, tell people what's going on. Anytime you have secrecy, that erodes trust. And it's like, that's a way to build coming out of this, regardless of what happens, that we had that. So double down on communication, double down on engagement. So, and engagement has a / well-being. So now it's not just about engaging people. It's really about their well-being. So that's one recommendation. It's, there's physical stress on being isolated. There's mental stress. Like, these people are going to eventually have to get out of this into a different world. And it's really focused from a mental state on that side. And the last one is double down on gratitude. we're asking people to do things that are very different than maybe what they're used to doing, shifting their roles, changing, doing more with less, whatever. And if you double down the gratitude, the intrinsic motivation that comes as an employee and you, the employer, that goes a long way in maintaining, you know, and how you kind of handle and deal with people. And then right under all those things is the word EQ, right? It is all about the emotional intelligence, because these people, they didn't do it themselves, to your point, John. And I find those are really, really important tasks at this moment in time.
I think you should send it to Jamal Lindo's Disrupt Talk on EQ.
Oh, okay. Yeah, actually, I've seen it. Yeah, maybe I'll shoot that out after this as well. You know, I actually, I know we're up on 203. There's still about 70 people around. There were a couple of questions. So if you're cool, John, I'm cool to stick around and answer some of these if people want to.
I'm good. Let me just check I think I have a 2:30, but I'm good to go for then.
Yeah, and maybe another like 4 or 5 minutes, just seeing some interesting ones here. But, you know, actually, Michael made it a point. Maybe it's a generational thing, but I think there's positive result from both environments. Like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm so kind of done being at home and looking at only people on video screens. So I totally get it. The discussion earlier about you know, getting in the office from a social perspective. One of the questions interesting is, how do we engage the hourly workers during these times? Receptionists, admin team members, facilities. My original reaction is they're still people too, and of the same motivations that anyone else has. So a lot of that empathy is required. But John, any thoughts on that?
I think any of those frontline jobs are some of the most important jobs that people don't acknowledge. And they're some of the most readily jobs that are impacted by this. And that's a shame. Like, I'm not a detail guy. I'm not great at the administrative stuff at all. Like, to then kind of lose that resource, lose that help, lose that capability, and then say, oh, by the way, John, you have to work from home now, and your cat's going to be mad at you because you're home all day. Like, these are people that are the pulse of organizations. So outside of what we've already talked about, and just the maintaining conversation, maintaining as much community as you can, doing what you can to help support, because a lot of these roles they're not the biggest paying roles either. So this sort of impact has a major impact on their lives. So I think outside of upping the communications and kind of maintaining the contact, it's really difficult. But you know, I was watching and rewatching the Office right now on Netflix. And if you see the transition of how the Pam character went from going from Pam the receptionist to Pam the salesperson to Pam the mother, and Pam the salesperson as the mother, and blah, 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 blah. She had to deal with all of those other characters, the Jims, the Michaels, the Dwights, I'm not going to name all the characters. But these are people that are, I'm gonna use a rough term here. They're fed shit and kept in the dark. They're mushrooms. You know what I mean? And when they're not there, all of a sudden you realize how much you love mushrooms. And it's one of these things where they'll likely have one of the first opportunities to move somewhere else, because every organization is going to need frontline support, whether it be customer support, administrative support, people support, that kind of thing. So these are people that likely need the stability the most and have the most options, or will have the most options when this kind of, I don't want to say blows over, I don't want to downplay, but now's the time to really make them know how much they care, or how much you care about them, I think.
Yeah. And to be honest, like, one of the thoughts, and I don't think this should just be, you know, in a crisis, but maybe it's more highlighted when you think about, you know, coming out of this and your employer brand, is if there's an alignment in your organization to these people's individual roles to a broader thing, whether it is the purpose of your organization, or we call it our passion statement, whether it's your values or virtues, or even if your company's rallying around something else, right? Like giving back and trying to support the community when it comes to this COVID crisis, that's a really good way to engage people, right? Like they're part of something bigger than their individual role. We heard that old adage, right? It's the janitorial service at NASA. And, you know, I think JFK asked him, like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm putting people on the moon. He's like, well, you're cleaning the floor. He's like, no, if I don't do that, then this doesn't happen. If that doesn't happen, then we can't have, and everyone's heard that adage. But I think if you start, you know, even at our organization, we have to shift people's roles based on what they were doing day to day to something completely different that aligns with our passion. We have a passion, we call it improve work lives. And we're like, we're going to help people educate on how to get out of this. Like, we're going to help improve lives with our community. And that kind of helps people engage them in terms of their role is more than, you know, answering the phone, you know, doing sales or whatever it is. So that's one way I've seen it approached well in the past. And hopefully, you know, it's anonymous on there. Hopefully that helps.
So there was a question here. Is it inappropriate to continue to build employer brand reputation externally on digital platforms like LinkedIn right now? I would only say it's inappropriate if it's not authentic. Like there's so much tone deaf messaging out there right now that's inappropriate, 100%. Like, let's acknowledge that we're in a crisis. Let's acknowledge that our normal is not normal. Like let's not talk about what we did 6 weeks ago for some team building event and forget about what's actually happening. Like, no one wants to, I don't want to say no one. I don't want to digest inauthentic, obvious marketing nonsense that's probably been queued up in a Hootsuite account for months, you know? So I don't think it's inappropriate to continue to build. I think actually there's a guy on LinkedIn, Nate Guggia out of California, who's just a brilliant employer branding guy. And he was talking about today, he posted something today, and he said something around the lines of, you know, now is not the time to send out canned employer brand messaging content that you developed 6 months ago. Now is the time to go to your employees and be empathetic and be authentic and be real and see how the story has changed versus how you were representing your organization 6 months ago versus how you did yesterday. Because if it hasn't changed, you're behind the 8 ball, and then yeah, that's inappropriate. If you're focusing more on your existing employee stories now, I think like Wave HQ out of Toronto is doing a great job of sharing kind of how their employees are getting by in the new world and how they're staying connected and all that kind of thing. I mentioned Sira before, employees shifting their focus around, instead of promoting Sira, promoting the food bank, that kind of thing. All of that is wonderful stuff. So if you're leveraging this opportunity now to have more conversations with your employees that are less about, not to trash employee engagement, but less about the business and more about the people, you're going to find there's a different narrative. And if you shift that, there's nothing wrong with promoting that new narrative because it's not tone deaf and it's real.
Cool. All right, we went 10 minutes over. I want to be respectful to everyone else's time. And there may be a few questions that came in. Apologies. We're going to, unfortunately, have to cut it there. But John, I want to appreciate taking your time to be on the webinar. You know, if anyone is interested in the concept of some of the remote work items that we're and leading people remotely, we have a fantastic speaker next week coming in, doing a little more of a presentation on this with some questions and conversation as well. So just a big thank you from the WorkTango webinar team. John, really appreciate it. And all of you for participating and asking questions. Thank you so much. Obviously challenging times, but you know, we will come out of it. And you know, I think it's how we handle our people, you know, day in and day out. That's going to put us all on the top end of that. So thanks everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Take care, guys.